This ceremony marked the end of an era. The crowd knew it. As they gathered at the Naval Air Station, they were in a sentimental, quiet, nostalgic mood. The guest of honor was retiring from naval aviation today. After more than 20 years of distinguished service, the old warrior of countless skies was being given a final tribute and a last farewell. But the honored guest today was not a fighting man of the United States Navy. It was an airplane, not an ordinary plane, but a magnificent aircraft that had served our nation in peace and war for a record-breaking 2 decades. The officers and men gathered here are saying goodbye to an old friend, the last Skyraider in Navy service. The sturdy, prop-driven attack bomber, affectionately known as a Spad, was about to be piped over for the flight to its final destination, the Naval Aviation Museum at Pensacola, Florida. Douglas Skyraiders rewrote the history of close air support. They were the first aircraft ever to carry their own weight in bomb loads. They became one of the best known, most effective propeller-driven aircraft the world would ever see. For more years than any other plane in aviation history, they were the guts and the backbone of the United States Navy. Yet, this versatile eagle of naval aviation came within a whisker of not being born at all. The story of the Skyraider began in our nation's capital in 1944. The Second Great War was coming to an end, closing the book on the most extensive campaign of all time by carrier-borne aircraft. Up to that time, the Douglas Dauntless, designated the SBD, had been and in fact still was the Navy's foremost attack aircraft. But the war in the Pacific had changed so much that the need for a new attack bomber was becoming evident. 3 top Douglas engineers attended a meeting in Washington where they learned 2 things. First, all further modifications on the SBD were canceled. Second, they discovered 2 other companies had been asked to submit proposals for a new attack aircraft. The Douglas engineers went to their hotel and worked through the night on preliminary sketches of the new Skyraider. The following morning was the deadline for any consideration. The sketches intrigued the Navy enough that Douglas was allowed to enter the competition and eventually was awarded the contract. In 9 short months, the Skyraider evolved from lines on a blueprint to a plane. Early in March 1945, the prototype was test flown. From the first moment, the Navy knew they had a winner. What they had no way of knowing at that time was that they had a champion. The Navy had been searching for a new dive bomber, attack aircraft, to meet the changing tactical and operational requirements. The Skyraider gave them all that and much more. Within the span of the next 12 years, Douglas Aircraft Company was to manufacture 3,180 Skyraiders in 7 versions and 28 subversions. January 1948, the USS Coral Sea embarked on her maiden voyage. The first launch and recovery ever attempted from the flight deck of the newly christened carrier was accomplished by a Skyraider. was only fitting and proper for the Skyraider to join the Coral Sea as she sailed for the first time. For, as fate would ordain some 20 years later, the same carrier and the very same squadron would witness the last combat cruise of the Never Say Die Skyraiders. But before that day was to arrive, the Skyraider proved to be the muscle in the Navy's air arm. She earned her nickname, the Pedigreed Pulverizer, as the Skyraider served with distinction in 2 major wars. Striking with deadly payloads from the carrier USS Valley Forge, Skyraiders blasted targets in Korea on July 3rd, 1950, just 3 days after the start of the United Nations action. From then on, hardly a day passed that Skyraiders didn't strike. Since the Korean War, Skyraider squadrons on board America's 15 attack carriers have been on the line ready to perform in every Cold War situation where naval power has been brought to bear. Lebanon, Suez, Matsu, Quemoy, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Vietnam. During this period, the old Skyraider managed to stay on the varsity, while 5 different types of jet attack aircraft have made the team, been benched, and eventually have had their numbers retired from the carrier aircraft inventory. The Skyraider's longevity on the first team of strike aircraft is tacit acknowledgement of her outstanding performance over the years. Above all, the Skyraider was versatile, equipped to perform 4 major missions: day attack, all-weather attack, airborne early warning, and countermeasures. Some versions of the Skyraiders could, however, through flight deck adaptation kits, convert into a VIP or high-density passenger aircraft, or an ambulance, or cargo plane, or an anti-submarine search craft, a target tow, and even a tanker. In her primary role of attack aircraft, the spectrum of usable weapons ranges from torpedoes to rockets, to cannons, to bullets to bombs, including nuclear weapons. A single Skyraider is a half-dozen airstrikes all by itself. The Skyraider demonstrated that it was the first plane capable of carrying greater than its own structural weight in armament. The truest method of measuring any plane is to talk to the men who fly her.
I'm Lieutenant J.G. Chuck Tome from Aurora, Illinois.
I'm Lieutenant J.G. Robert Hagan from Long Beach, California.
Do you know what a Spad is? This is a Spad, A1 Skyraider. We call it the Spad probably only because it's got the prop on the front and it's an old airplane. But that's a pilot's pet name for it.
And it's rather an antique in the days of the fast jets. So consequently, we wanted to dub the aircraft a certain very distinctive name, and so we named it the Spad.
Oh, we really love them. I think there isn't a Spad pilot in the fleet that's not flying it that really wanted them. Like, in my case, I wanted them before I even came into the Navy, so I would have really been disappointed flying any other version.
Well, in the Korean War, the Spad was used generally as a strike aircraft. In other words, if a group of soldiers, Marines are on the ground and they're in trouble, there's a couple of ways that they can help themselves, either through artillery or air. And this is where the Spad came in quite a bit in the Korean War, in the mission of getting in there real close to the troops and dropping their bombs, shooting their guns and firing their rockets. And the ground troops really had a lot of confidence in the old Spad because the plane is stable. It really is a stable platform for ordnance delivery, and the pilots, of course, were outstanding, and they could really get their ordnance on the target. However, the primary mission is the Rescue Combat Air Patrol, or RESCAP, which we do escort helicopters into North Vietnam to suppress ground fire while the helicopter is in transit.
Well, that's a pretty big morale factor for the pilots that go down over there, too, because when they go down, they like to see the Spads up above protecting them from being captured, at least long enough until the helo can get there. And a Spad has got a lot of firepower, can stay there a long time, and protect them for a long time accurately until the helo can come and pick them up.
After more than 20 years, the huge old bird saw its last combat action in Vietnam.
Just south of Hanoi, as a rest cap. After rendezvous, we will proceed as a division, rendezvous point, to the vicinity of the Hourglass River. Check in with the North Star destroyer, pick up our helicopters, at which time we'll split 2 sections. I'd like one section just south of the Red River mouth to pick up anybody coming out in trouble. From the time we cross the coast, we want to get the helo just as high as possible. There's no missile activity reported this far.
There came that inevitable moment when it was the last battle and the last war for the Skyraider. When that final battle was over, the proud old Navy fighting bird folded her wings and called it a day. She came home from Vietnam in style. Like most great planes, the Skyraider was created out of need and necessity. But even her most ardent supporters in the 40s never dreamed the Spad would be around to celebrate her 20th operational birthday. Combat aircraft just don't stay around that long, very often. Yet, more than 2 decades have gone by since she sailed on the maiden voyage of the USS Coral Sea. Now the old Skyraider was coming home from her final cruise with the same squadron and aboard the same carrier. Now that final moment was at hand. Bureau number 35300 taxied past the side boys. The crowd stood at attention. And the last Navy Skyraider was formally piped over. The heroic memory of the Skyraider will long be recalled and relived in the hearts and minds of the fighting men of the United States Navy.